What a day. What a day already.
Morning. Welcome to the Backpack Show, everybody. Nothing
Were
much
we?
happening today.
Nope.
Mm-mm.
You know, what we usually do is we want to find business insights from unusual places. And our guest today, I've had on numerous times because Dr. Robert Brooks is a wizard when it comes to understanding resilience, mental health, all the good things. He's a friend. He's a father to a son that I really enjoy a great deal. And just a general all-around mensch. And we have him on to talk a little bit about that old silliness that's going on today, I think. What's that?
The election. So I was seeing a lot of people express concern and anxiety and stress about the election, even if they already voted, even if they don't live in this country. There's just a lot of anxiety. And I was like, man, we've got to find a way to deal with this stress. And then I was like, Dr. Robert Brooks.
He'd be perfect. This is Kerry's fault today. Backpack Show. I was thinking about the fact that Dr. Brooks has been on every variation of my podcast and all this stuff just when we do audio, earlier iterations of this show, and now the Backpack Show, and just how far we've come and how fun it is to just have, kind of that consistency though as well.
I had got a new t-shirt before we started. I just wanted to mention it's buy from, you can't see it over my name tag too well, buy from a Black woman.
Oh, cool.
Nikki Porche's organization.
That's really cool.
So it came yesterday. I was like, yes. It's a little cold to wear a t-shirt today, by the way. I feel like an actress on a set. I'll put like my robe on after this. It's really cold here.
It's just a shirt for the look-see.
By
the way, notice that it's all YouTube so far this morning. That's interesting.
Hello, everyone. Oh, your parents are here.
Yeah, my papa. So nice to see everybody. Do me a big giant favor. One of the things that we always say is make sure you comment. Let us know that you're here. Len and I already had a conversation this morning, so it's.
I love Len. Now I feel left out.
Well, he was just saying thanks for doing the sponsor thing. All right, let's drag in Dr. Brooks because we have some questions.
So many questions.
Hello, Dr. Robert Brooks.
Hello, Kerry and Chris.
Help.
How are you?
Help.
How are we? Okay.
Gee, I was more relaxed this morning. Kerry and Chris know this. And just as I was getting started, I accidentally dropped my MacBook Pro, which wouldn't work. So I'm trying to be very resilient. I quickly hooked up. The lighting is not as much as I would like, as good, to my iMac. Thank heavens for several computers in there. So I'm just trying to not be as stressed and say thank heavens that I do have another place that I can do this.
It really does feel like things sort of pile up. Hi, Rick. So you're sort of like, it's like, okay, so there's the pandemic and now there's all the tension and now today's the election and then your laptop thing happens and you're like, for some people, that would be the one thing that's like, I'm just going to go back to bed.
Yeah, but I knew I had two wonderful people interviewing me today, so I couldn't. So I quickly had to move my ring light and try this. So,
when they get here, we'll let them take over.
Okay.
The two wonderful people. Yeah.
But the reality is, it's a very stressful time and it's a very stressful day.
Yes.
So, one of the things I saw this morning, David Armano on Twitter said, why does this look just like the beginning of every Purge movie? You're trying to go with those kind of like slice of life vignettes where everything's just fine. And we did this once already. We did this 4 years ago. And I think that's the other thing is this is a sequel. Like if Michael Myers is in the neighborhood twice, it's a challenge, but people are definitely, and I am not, and I don't even have to just say people are definitely feeling a massive amount of stress this time, even though, ultimately something will happen. Mm-hmm. And then we'll have to decide what to do thereafter. Mm-hmm. Hey, Felix, what do you think about that?
Yeah, well, first of all, there is much more stress. The American Psychological Association back in 2016 did a study how stressed people were. And at that point, 52%, which is a high enough number, said they were very stressed about the election. And there are a few more Democrats than Republicans and independents, but it was really across the board. Well, just recently, for 2020, the number went up to 68%, saying they were significantly stressed by this election. And we know whether it's the election or whether it's the pandemic or the social unrest, you don't need a psychologist to tell you this. The level of anxiety and depression and mental health issues in the country at all ages, kids as well as adults, has risen a great deal. And that's why, just to bring in one other point, it's interesting. I was so excited to have this opportunity to share some of these ideas, but it seems like in all my webinars in the last 2 months or interviews, I've talked about also self-compassion. So as I was sharing with you before we went on the air, I don't want anyone to be more stressed after this interview listening to me than before. And there's a wonderful concept called self-compassion. Kristen Neff at the University of Texas in Austin has written a great deal about it. And what I'm going to say to all your listeners and viewers is that these are unprecedented times. And what we really have to do is to be kind to ourselves, self-compassion, and give ourselves and our kids a slack and a little leeway. We're all going to experience some difficulties right now.
Yeah. One of the thoughts I keep having is that there's so many different ways that people choose to soothe themselves. My joke has been that I'm going to go out and I'm going to get some beer. I probably should have some gummies. And then if it all fails, just some broken glass. But I made that joke, as one does, but there's a lot of people who are recovering. They're recovering from a various addiction. They can't fall back on the crutch of the 316% uptake in alcohol consumption over this time frame. So what are the other soothers? What are the ways that people kind of push themselves through this and, kind of breathe through this breech birth?
Your question, Chris, for me brings up a very important point. When people have said to me, what is one of the most important things in being resilient? In all of my writings, I've used a concept called personal control, and you'll see how it gets to the point you made. Basically, personal control is rare. What I've seen in 40 years as a psychologist, seeing both kids and adults in therapy, is basically people who are more resilient focus on what they have control over rather than what they do not. So many people basically, without wanting to, fall into victim mentality. See, this is happening. I have no control over this. So what your question really brings up for me is, what are the things we have control over? We have very little control over COVID, except we have more control than we realize in terms of, I'm sorry, it's become so politicized, face masks and social distancing. One of my all-time favorite books that really touches on personal control, a very powerful book for me, was Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning.
Right.
He's a Holocaust survivor, psychiatrist, who said even in the concentration camps, you could select more than you realized your attitude and response to situations. So what your question brings up for me is, okay, what are some of those things we have control over? So when you mentioned, not everyone could go have a beer or whatever, but there are some things which I'd like to just, mention a few.
Sure.
One of the things, as we were leading up to the election, is you have to look at what are things you can have some control over. One is your attitude and response. In what way are you supporting the candidates you want? How are you supporting them? See, that you have control over. Even with kids are much more resilient when they feel there's something they can do. So when they wore, face masks or they social distance is just very vital. And I'll mention just a couple of other points because your question triggered so much in me. We know, based on some of my own research, but a lot of people, that one of the things that helps people to feel most resilient is if they feel they're making a positive difference in things. Research I did years ago when I was writing a book about school climate, I asked people, what was one of your favorite memories of school as you were growing up, something that boosted your motivation and dignity? Right at the top was when you were asked to help out. So one of the things I've really been suggesting to parents and teachers and for ourselves is, in what way are you making a positive difference? With all the negativity that's been going around, one of the things that's been most heartening for me, every day I read stories of kids who are raising money for a charity or writing letters of gratitude to first responders. So this also is very important. And the last point, and then I'll certainly welcome your questions. The last point, years ago, there was a wonderful article written by a psychologist about TLCs. And I remember saying, oh, that tender loving care. Well, it's close. It was therapeutic lifestyle changes. And what this psychologist
close, doctor.
What?
It's not that close.
But it's really therapeutic lifestyle changes. What the psychologist argued is this. He said there are more things we have control over in terms of taking care of ourselves than we may realize. And he said we have to focus on that. So he's focused on several, which all of us know. One was exercise. And, John Rady, a psychiatrist friend who wrote a book called Spark, even 15, 20 minutes of walking a day can be so helpful. Another is diet. Now, I must admit that sometimes, I exercise regularly, but sometimes it's so I can have an extra chocolate chip cookie. And meditation. I now, every afternoon for just 10 minutes, will meditate. I exercise in the morning, meditate there. And there are so many apps. You two probably are more familiar with the apps than I am. There's so many apps which people can use. And my meditation is probably like a 5-year-old. I sort of like breathe in and out. So all of these can be very helpful. They're within our control to do. And the last point I want to make is the sad thing is, I've seen this especially with my adult patients. What is one of the first things that goes when they're anxious or depressed? Exercise and their diet, and they don't have time for these other things. But what this psychologist who wrote about TLCs argued is, but this is what we have to focus on. So there are certain things. So a long answer to your question, but it triggered so many thoughts in me.
But how can you get people who are in the grip of the stress to refocus and take control of the things they can take control of?
Yeah, what I always say is, and this is going to sound so obvious, start small. What I've seen often in therapy is I once had some man in therapy who had never really exercised before. And I thought he was kidding at first, but he said, starting tomorrow, Bob, I've read some of your articles, whatever, I'm going to start jogging 5 miles a day. Well, I almost fell over, and I said, 5 miles a day. Have you ever jogged before? He said, no. I know it sounds comical, but he was very serious. And I said, what if you started by walking around your block? Because one of the biggest problems is when people, and this is where self-compassion has to come in, when people say to themselves, okay, I'm going to do this, and then if it doesn't work out, they feel worse. As a matter of fact, there's a wonderful theory in psychology by a psychologist, Gabrielle Udingen, called mental contrasting, which some of your listeners may know about. She wrote a book, Rethinking Positive Thinking. And what she said is one of the biggest problems we make is that we have certain goals, but we don't anticipate the obstacles. Now, some people, when they hear that, may say, well, what do you want, a self-fulfilling prophecy for failure if you think of obstacles? But what she brings up is, she said, think of the obstacles, but then think of how you're going to cope with the obstacles. So she says, if you just think of goals and not consider the obstacles, you got a problem. If all you think about are the obstacles, you're not even going to try the goals. But if you can think about, that's why she calls it mental contrasting. Okay, here are the goals. What are the possible obstacles? When these obstacles appear, how am I going to feel? What am I going to do? And most importantly, how am I going to cope with them? This ties to personal control. When you feel you have strategies to cope with the obstacles that come up, you're going to be much more willing to strive towards your goals.
When I was in law school doing moot court, which is like, trials that you run with students and fake people like that don't actually mean anything, they said you kind of turn the volume off in your head and just see yourself speaking very confidently and just kind of envisioning success, even if you can't know exactly what's going to happen or what exactly the obstacles will be, but envision yourself overcoming them. Rob Hatch says the temptation of chocolate is strong.
Rob Hatch was very kind to send me some delicious chocolate.
Need my address, Rob? I think you have it. No.
We had the opportunity to interview quite the chocolatier a few weeks ago too, so we won't talk about that right now. When you talked about the small steps and all that, in 2003, I was I was a little lighter than I am now, right? Because thanks COVID. But I decided to figure out how to run, and I'd never run in my whole life. I figured, I'll run when Godzilla's behind me. That's a good day to start. And I read this Couch to 5K program, and what it said was so freeing to me. So just go out and start walking for a bit. Give yourself at least 5 minutes of walking. When you get done the 5 minutes of walking, keep an eye on the telephone poles. He said, we'll presume there's phone poles around. Run from one phone pole to the next pole. Not crazy, just, jog it up a little bit, just to the next phone pole. And then catch your breath for as many extra phone poles as you need to. And once you feel like you can actually breathe and actually answer a question from a human being, then do one more phone pole. He said, just do that for like a half an hour today. Mm-hmm. And that was like a whole week of it. And so all it was run one phone pole, catch your breath for like 8 phone poles, and then, run again. And it worked. And from that, I did a 5K. And from that, I did, a 5 mile, then a 10 mile, then a half marathon, then a marathon. And the marathon was technically, even though it was 26.2 miles, it was technically the half distance on this ultra marathon that I thought I was going to go back and get the year after, which was a 50 miler. But I gave up running for Lent.
I never picked it back up again.
That's an interesting thing to give up for Lent. But anyway, but it sounds so simple. But it's, when I look at the therapy, I'm like, because I've worked with a number of kids with learning problems, and they get a book report assignment, and they'd be overwhelmed because all they thought about is doing the report. And we used to literally, it sounds so funny now. Okay, the first 2 days is a day to just use 2 days to select a book. And some kids could easily do it within an hour, but then they felt, they felt they were ahead of the game. But it's the same true of anything. Some of the books I've written, I've got to look at it. Okay, I'm going to get the introduction done. And then chapter 1. If I think of just the end product, it could feel overwhelming. You're still going to be able to reach those goals. And with this, this mental contrasting technique does, which I think is very important, is I think one of the mistakes I made as a beginning therapist was not preparing my patients for the obstacles they might face. You get so excited, here's a new strategy, but when you're prepared for the obstacles and how to cope with them, that's why I love this technique. It's very important, just like to tie it to the election. If anyone thinks that their anxiety is going to be less by tomorrow, they may be fooling themselves. I just say, first of all, there may be a great uncertainty about it. You still have to continue with your self-care, and it may be a while. And to do that, but that's where self-compassion comes in. No, you're going to feel anxious. How are you going to handle it? So
we're going to take a quick moment to talk sponsors. I like that one, Kerry. Kerry put up the prescription for chocolates.
I'm sorry. I'm really not looking below here.
Actually,
I have a responsibility to research the guests we have on the show, so I had to try like a whole assortment of these chocolates.
Oh God, that's
so
funny.
good.
And listen, I got to tell Dr. Brooks before we go to the ads, the number one seller out of all his chocolates. So he does chocolates for like the Emmys, the Grammys, all these like fancy pants people. And like each little chocolate is as much as like $5 or $6 each. Like it's the real deal.
Wow.
But his number one seller is blue cheese chocolate.
Blue cheese chocolate.
Doesn't it sound like really gross? But
yeah.
And why it's number one?
Say that because, but blue cheese chocolate. But sometimes I've had stuff that you say, if you just told me, I'd say, oh, what? And then all of a sudden it's somewhat delicious. But blue cheese chocolate,
I feel really like it's on a dare. That's what I think.
Well, because it has sort of like the essence of blue cheese. It's not overpowering. I don't even like blue cheese, and I thought it was really good. Anyway, I like them all, so I really can't. I'm a terrible person to ask for advice about choosing them. Just try some. Totally.
Who else I like? I like our sponsors. We're sponsored by StreamYard, where you can make a show just like this on election day. You just have to get your own Dr. Robert Brooks. Go to cbrogan.me/StreamYard. Get the show going. It's a really easy app. It's what Kerry turned me on to make this show. It's the best. Easy.
And you did not want to change either. You were so grumpy about it.
I did not. I'm not a big fan of change, it turns out, which is weird, being sort of a futurist light. But look, if you want to talk about change out your dumb website, you crappy authors.
Stop it.
You can go to PubSite.
Talented, brilliant authors who've written a valuable book people need to read. you need a website so they can find your book, buy it, and read it, and then be improved by it and have new ideas. So go to pub-site.com. It's really easy, even if you're like not at all technical, to put together your own website with exactly the elements you need. And that's because FSB Associates, the book publicity firm that's been in business 25 years, so fantastic, they created this tool for you. So it has all the things you need for an effective website to promote yourself as an author, to promote your appearances when you can do that again, to promote your book. So go get some, pub-site.com. It's a 14-day free trial. And after that, it's just $19.99 a month. And if you absolutely don't want to build it, Chris, they'll do it for you.
$8,000. That's how much it costs if you want them to build a site.
No, to have them build it for you is $499, which is crazy. It's like 10% of what you would pay to have a developer put together like a Squarespace site for you. Pub-site.com. So good. Go get it.
Go get some. You should also know that they're the sponsors of Person of the Day.
Yes.
So, and by the way, I have a new sponsor coming on in a little bit, which is going to give us our own domain so we can have a fancy pants backpack.
Blue cheese chocolate sounds like apocalypse food.
And she was kind enough to write this whole script out like she thought I was going to read it. And I have to send back a message to go, you have to see how we do it. It's a little different. Dr. Brooks. Dr. Brooks. When perseverating, it was funny because this term has been around for just a little while, but it's sort of not evenly distributed yet. And it's called doom scrolling. And this is when we get on our device. Doom scrolling.
Doom scrolling.
So we're doing this and we're doing this and we're doing this.
It's like disaster.
We're trying to eat the news as much as we can. And we just want to see what else did he do today, whichever one you don't like.
Or whatever just happened today.
Sure, these people are bad. So doom scrolling is a real term that sort of basically means that you've gone past reasonable, insane amounts of social content. You know, you're just kind of grinding on your thing that bothers you, perseverating. What's the Dr. Brooks recipe for making doom scrolling a little better?
Yeah, and I'm not saying any of this is easy, but one has to look at how do you distract yourself from that, or take yourself away from that. And one of the things I often feel is that we should think about some other activities which bring us, what's the best way, bring us a greater enjoyment. So again, I don't want to be overly simplistic, but when people ask me about that they're perseverating on certain things, thing about it is, I know for myself, I'm not the paragon of resilience here, the model of resilience, but I do try to test it. So one of the things I find is when I'm really feeling down, I'm asking myself, okay, what do you have control over? I know I have certainly limited the amount of TV I watch, especially the news. Not that I watched that much before. I ask, what do I have control over? So I will go online to read the news because I have control over how much I want to read or not. But there's something else. So that's avoiding. But I always look at, but what do you go towards? And again, I'm just going to say this throughout. I know some of this may sound very simple, but I say, what brings me enjoyment? What is it that, that really I will feel better about? So it could be, that's why I started meditating in the afternoon, because I exercise in the morning. I said, you know what, this really helps me. Is it going to totally solve the problem? No. One of the things that's really helped me, I like to write anyway, but I'll just write for myself some things about that I feel will be very helpful. I'll give you another example where there's a whole body of research. It has to do with gratitude. And, years ago, when the whole field of positive psychology came in, and at the beginning, a lot of the research was done more with the elderly people who really felt they were no longer worthwhile or whatever. Some psychologists asked them to do the following. Some asked them to do it every night, some every third night, some once a week. Write down 2 or 3 things for which you are grateful. I'm telling you, if I was on that research, I would have said, this sounds like, a gimmick. It was so powerful. So I often suggest, write down 1 or 2 things you're grateful for. I'll write down, I'm grateful for my kids. I'm grateful for my grandkids. I'm grateful for this. But there's another part of gratitude, which has really been very helpful throughout. And I think, based on your question, Chris, very important now. It's not only what you're grateful for, but expressing gratitude towards others. Now, before I mentioned even kids writing notes to first responders, But do you know, it's interesting. I have a whole file of people writing to me who, out of the blue, hearing me, then wrote a note of gratitude to a mentor of theirs, or wrote a note to a teacher that they had, or to even a family member. We now know from the research that one, think about what you're grateful for, but also expressing gratitude not only helps you, but the person receiving that note, it's very helpful. All of those help to lessen stress. So one could certainly avoid stressful things like spending, 20 hours a day on social media or TV, but that's avoiding. I'm also always looking for things. What are the things you could do that bring a sense of satisfaction, that bring a sense of really enjoyment to your life? So yes, you could avoid things, but just to avoid things for me is negative. What are the things that you can do that we now know based on research really helps people to be more resilient?
Kate
And it's
says
a
she
very
does
powerful thing.
kindness scrolling, like
sorry.
Kate actively seeks out like positive stories. There are actually whole subreddits devoted to positive
Yes.
things. So you could go find some if you need like a infusion of
Oh,
positivity.
yeah. Well, when the pandemic first started, John Krasinski, he started that good news.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? It was very important, I think, to do that. I'm always looking. It's very interesting. Maybe it's as a psychologist when I read online, I'm always looking for some of that good news. And the other thing is, again, I don't know where people feel about this, the humor. It's interesting. I took part in it was called the Global Stress Summit. It had been scheduled before, but it happened. It actually took place right as the pandemic hit. And several of the other speakers talked about humor. And looking back, not that anything that happened was humorous in some sense, but looking back, the number of cartoons I received related to the pandemic, humorous, cartoons, was amazing. My son, Rich, who, Chris certainly knows, we all know that. Remember when toilet paper was in short supply or whatever? Well, it was a well-known cartoon of a Brinks truck with guards around it. And what were they taking out? Toilet paper. We could all relate to that. So humor also, when used appropriately, is a very important thing. So people should be thinking about lessening those adverse situations, but what are the things that actually can bring you a sense of contentment, really, and not only to you, but to others?
Oh, Chris's mom says that she's grateful for all that's shared on the backpack show, that she's learned a lot.
Is that your mom?
That's my mom. My mom and dad show up here.
Mom, you have a wonderful son who has really made a world of difference to this world.
And this one's good too.
And me, right? My little brother is great, but
And you too, Kerry.
I hope someday to aspire.
At a conference, and I was blown away by the humanity he expressed, and it was a very psychologically oriented talk. As Chris knows, I went up right afterwards, and I said, "That's very psychological."
I'm going to write him a note.
I couldn't have had a bigger head from, this super famous psychologist professional who's written so many books saying, "Yours is pretty psychological." It's like, yes. Could have run right under a bus right then. What was going to be better? All right. One last question. What are your favorite coping behaviors that you've seen emerge out of this? And an example or two is adult coloring books. I've seen a lot. Mo Willems, the children's artist and author who writes "Don't Let the Pigeon Drive the Bus," he's doing a doodle live event tonight where everyone can come and doodle with him. Also, the video game Animal Crossing, there have been a bunch of articles published that people who couldn't even afford to go to their therapist anymore were using Animal Crossing as a crutch. Have you seen, or have you heard of any kind of like coping or positive things that you want?
One is, I've seen with my granddaughter, she all of a sudden started to make a collage, and other kids are making a collage. I mean, what I like, well, for kids especially, but even for adults, what I like is if they do something and it's very concrete so they could see it, it lasts in that regard. My wife, who feels she's not a good artist, she teaches adult education courses at Brandeis, but she's taking one on art and they have to do a project. You should see her excitement. She did a Halloween scene, cutouts and whatever. And for me, I said, that's very therapeutic. So what I feel is people should really, this is time to explore different possibilities. I've had people write to me who said, oh, they never cooked, and even making a sandwich like it's they just climb Mount Everest. So there's not necessarily one particular way. I just think people should gravitate towards things that they haven't done before, and then try them and see how helpful they can be. I've seen a lot of kids have created things, Legos. I've gotten these letters from parents who have told me this, but even some parents, my son Richard, he's gotten into woodworking. He did not, that's not in the Brooks genes. I'll tell you this, but he made a workbench, and now the other day he was telling me, some of the shelving he's doing. And my feeling is this is great. It gives us a time to look at different things that we can do. But I especially like when you have a concrete thing at the end. It's not always possible, but then you could really see it, and it could be very helpful. Because whatever the election, I know you had me on about whatever the election results are going to be, there are going to be a lot of people who are very happy and a lot of people who are very angry, and maybe a lot of people in between in that. So we really have to look at it. Gets to the personal control. We have to look at, okay, whatever the results, what do we do to better our lives and the lives of the people there? How do we lessen the anger or disappointment by really doing some of the things I mentioned, making a difference in the lives of others? So.
And, we put our own masks on first before we help the others. That's always a big challenge too.
Oh, yes.
Fuzzy says that she's become a plant lady during all this, and she loves that. So.
Yeah, that's other people have told me they have more plants in their house now.
Kate,
outdoors, they're planting.
Kate points out that Marty picked up some Legos because of the backpack show. We had some Lego experts on that teach us how to do, a business discovery type things with Lego. And so Marty, I guess, had said that she'd never played with them before. She never had them. It just wasn't a thing. And so even in, Marty's a woman in her late 30s. So even she gets a chance to appreciate those. So the other thing I was saying about put your own mask on, I read the most bizarro moment. Reddit can be kind of interesting for seeing people sort of bare their soul in places where I kind of feel like maybe you're not going to get a lot of support if you bare your soul here. Maybe don't do that. But this person said that they really felt like, as a man, they had to really hold and shelter all the weight of their family and everybody, during this time, during this election. Like, it's all on me to keep calm and everything like that. But I'm not calm. I'm scared, and I want to be scared. And they were really having a real stressful moment because they felt like they had to be the linchpin of it all. How do you valve that? Is it just a self-care treatment, or am I asking the same question 5 ways, or how's that go?
But your question triggers, and not that, so I hope I'm not taking off left field or right field, is this. The research on resilience shows that to be resilient, you need supportive people in your life. The late psychologist Julius Siegel called, when he was talking about kids, charismatic adults, people from whom you gather strength. So when I heard what you just brought up, we have to, one of the things I've been asking people in my webinars is, who do you turn to for support? So, if it may be someone outside the family. What I get most concerned about is when people say there is really no one. And some people have said to me, even if they're in a family, I feel so isolated and lonely. And we know that could be devastating. So if the research shows that every one of us needs at least 1 or 2 people, hopefully even more, from whom we gather strength, then we really have to, this is where we have to be very active and think about, who is that? Who could we reach out to? I've spoken to people with just 1 or 2 close friends. And sometimes it's more difficult in the family. And I've spoken to some teenagers who said, my parents feel burdened enough, but you know what? They have a friend or 2 that they could talk about. Well, what it does is it not only normalizes the feelings you have, because other people say, I have the same feelings, but it also could be very reassuring, and people could come up with ideas. The most difficult thing, I think, is when people feel very lonely. And I've written about loneliness well before the pandemic. We all need people to whom we can really turn towards. We not only need charismatic adults in our life, we have to be charismatic adults for others, but that's what brings meaning to our life. So I always tell people, who are the ones that you feel most comfortable reaching out towards? And it could be 2 or 3 people for different reasons. And that to me is always just so important.
I hear you there. I have to address one comment that had come in. Just one quick second. And then I have to do one other thing too. Actually, I'm going to do both at the same time. I think this is a good way to do it. Hang on one second, Doctor. So we got to get to person of the day. I mean, this is sponsored by PubSite. We have a person of the day every day that we remember to do it. And by we, I mean me.
It is not selected along political lines. So regardless of who you're voting for today,
there's no
you
vote
are
here.
eligible for person of the day.
Kate says, Marty says, yeah, right, about the age. I called her in her late 30s. She said she's a proud 73. Kate, I'll be dead honest. I've seen a million pictures of Marty, and of course, she's not in her 30s. I absolutely thought she was probably in her early 50s, and I think the same of you. So when you say 73, go, Marty, go. I want to look like you. So, Kate, you're the person of the day. You are often my person of the day because you have so much powerful energy.
Kate wants to know where I went. I went to vote, Kate.
Yep, she's very fast. She's got to handle. Dr. Brooks gave her the right information, and it was good to handle. I always think back to the time that my grandmother went to vote. It was the weirdest thing. She worked in a paper mill all her life, so they used to cast their votes they would take a piece of old wood. It wasn't good enough to be toilet tissue, and then she would